So I'm here to talk about a number of things, basically going what's happening in the marketplace. And this is the overview of what we'll discuss. The market today, and the market today is a wild and crazy one, and we've been through quite a bit just from the market standpoint, let alone what we've all personally and professionally been through this year. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of a case study of two customers, two shipper customers, and then talk a little bit about this cycle that I've seen us fall into all too many times through the years. I've got just about 30 years into this business, and I certainly cannot predict when an event is going to happen. But I can predict with a high degree of certainty how buyers, whether they're shippers or brokers, how buyers will react as things are going in a negative fashion, let's say. And I can predict with a high degree of certainty how carriers will react and what will happen because as Maureen mentioned, we've been around a long time in this industry, the oldest privately held freight broker. We've seen a lot. And in order to be a broker and stay in business even for a few months, you've got to figure out a way to live in the razor thin margin that we live in. So I'll be talking a little bit about trying to share some of my experience, some of my observations, and then show you data that bolsters what I'm trying to say in terms of how we can set ourselves up for success, how we can build a durable supply chain that is walking in concert with the market forces that we are dealing with and likely going to be dealing with for most of our careers, at least in the next few years. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is this. This is many of you may be familiar already with the Morgan Stanley Freight Demand Index, and this red line shows this year, 2020, and it's a very busy slide. I completely get that. The blue line is not something that is, the blue line is the light blue line that red line is tracking is what they call straight line analysis. So that's not necessarily a year, but I'd like to just kind of show you that on this slide, if you go back to look at where it says May 9, that was Morgan Stanley's been, to me, they're the gold standard in terms of evaluating demand in the freight industry. And they've been doing it, as you can see on the chart, for many years. Let's see, my eyes are failing me, 2007. So you can see at least in Morgan Stanley's recorded history, and I haven't seen any data that I can rely upon that goes further. There may be, but in early May, that line shows that demand for freight was at an all-time low. And if you fast forward to 12 September, or even September 29, still, we've reached a period of time where we reached all-time high demand. So a wild year. And if you were wondering, if you're a shipper and you're wondering, how come I'm losing carrier capacity? How come my carriers are saying I don't have trucks in that area? And how come, if you're dealing with brokers, they're dealing with the same issues? You're in it with everyone in the marketplace. And I wanted to, just kind of talk about, now you can say, okay, this line, this red line isn't as high as the purplish line back in June of 2018. And it wasn't as high necessarily as what's coming up late October, late October of, what's that, 2017? But for this moment in time, this season, it is the all-time high. And what's I think also important to note is that we've had 20 something consecutive weeks of increased demand. Now, obviously, it's just sort of seemingly leveling out over the last 2 weeks. But what that feels like in a marketplace, if you're in the spot market, what it feels like, and I'll tell you, my team was experiencing a good bit of this. What it feels like is you quote something on Monday based on all the data that you have, and that data is right up until last week. You quote something on Monday, it may be outdated by the time you try to book that on Wednesday of the same week. That's what that feels like in the marketplace. That's the experience that everyone in the marketplace was feeling. And when that feeling happens, when that market condition happens, what else happens? Well, psychology plays a huge part. When carriers begin sensing that we're on an upswing, like the historic upswing. We've never gone from the lowest to the highest, ever. All-time lowest to the highest seasonal ever. It's never happened. So what's the feel? What's the emotion? Emotion plays a part in this. The emotion is, I'm getting my money's worth. I just suffered, in these previous months when we hit all-time low. So the sense is, when you're a shipper, when you're a buyer, when you're a broker, forwarders make use of carriers clearly. When you're going into that market, there's a psychology in that market that is also against you. So enough of that. It's the marketplace for those of us in that middle space that have to survive without a truck. Never had a truck in 60 years. We feel this, and the data that Morgan Stanley and many other people provide gives us good insight. And I shared this occasionally this season that I'm a history major in college, economics minor, and I've got my MBA, so I have a little bit of business training as well. But even the study of economics is one of understanding history using data. So I look to the past to learn about how I can be better in the future, and that's really how economists work. But what I began as I began talking more and more about what's happening in this marketplace, and began thinking more about what's happening in the global with the global pandemic, I couldn't help but sort of feel that this year, and we're only 9 full months into this year, and only 7 months into pandemic, we've experienced, in some ways, 100 years or more of American history. And it just bear with me for a second as I step. You see this slide here, and the dotted line. The dotted line is exactly that Morgan Stanley red line superimposed against my little story that I want to tell. But in January and February, we're very similar to 2019. In 2019, I think if you were buying transportation, or if you were even supplying transportation, you knew that the bullish market for freight that we had in 17, especially 18, had really kind of softened and leveled out, and we reached an equilibrium. And that equilibrium carried itself into January and February. And you might argue that as China began shutting down in January, and freight stopped coming into the country in January, February, you could argue, hey, it was this January, February even worse than what 2019 was. It really just depended on where your market was as a company. But nationally, it was like, got an equilibrium, maybe a little less. Then, of course, March hit, and COVID became a reality here on our shores. We began treating it as a reality here on our shores. And I look at that as somewhat like, experiencing what it must have been like in 1918 Spanish flu. It's the last pandemic of any consequence that we've had. And then all of a sudden, we had like the roaring 20s, and that's kind of the end of March. We were involved with it. Folks here from Philadelphia Traffic Club will remember Scott Paper. We haven't moved a load of toilet paper since Scott Paper was a company and not a brand. And probably for several years, you know, toward the end of there, we weren't doing business with Scott. That's a whole other story. I'll talk about over a beer sometime. But we haven't moved toilet paper in 30 plus years. We moved 500 truckloads of toilet paper at the end of March, and it was extraordinary. So trucking saw, as the market, as the economy was sensing a shutdown, everyone wanted to get their stuff as quickly as humanly possible. And a lot of that stuff ended up being toilet paper, paper towels, hand sanitizer, all the things that could possibly be in someone's inventory somewhere, all got out to retail markets. And then poof, nothing, crickets. Trucks parked out in front, or as close as they could to the White House, complaining that they needed subsidies, complaining that they want price regulation all over again so that they could never get prices lower than what they were experiencing. Well, Great Depression era feeling, right? So roaring 20s, Great Depression. And then, as I showed and spent considerable time on that last slide, we've had 20 plus weeks of straight up, 45-degree angle increase in demand. So a lot of that felt like, the 4 capacity crises of our generation. It's been 40 years since deregulation occurred in the trucking industry, and we've had 4 capacity crises in those 40 years. They don't come every 10 years. First one took 23 years to come in 2003. Second, third, and fourth came all in the last 6 years. So that realization that our market is changing so much more rapidly than anyone growing up in this industry, anyone experienced in this industry has ever seen, has to be a wake-up call. If you're not awake now, if you haven't figured out that 2014, 2018, 2020, and likely parts of 2021 are going to be chaotic and times that you've got to anticipate and you've got to plan for, you should maybe go into a different line of business, because I think all of us who have been seeing this and experiencing it are realizing that if you look at bigger picture is nobody wants inventory, right? Nobody in retail wants inventory. Amazon 2 days is last century. That was 2 years ago. We want same day. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's ironic that we don't want inventory, but every warehouse is blown out and maxed out, right? Where we want inventory is within an hour from the time that we order the good. In order to do that, however, those warehouses want turnaround as quickly as humanly possible, right? In order to do that, an emphasis has been placed on freight transportation. And that emphasis will only continue because, at least for the next several years, until we have an entirely different dynamic within supply chains. So we've got to be ready for change. We've got to be ready for rapid change. And there are ways that we can protect ourselves. Just another example, freight waves. They bought up a lot of the writers in the industry, and they've got a lot of different writers working for them, but they do have a great product as well that they sell, and that's Sonar. And Sonar's data they share from time to time. We shared just the last week. And what this particular readout of the Sonar product will show you is that I think most of us know that large shippers utilize transportation management systems, TMS systems. There's a variety, whole host of companies that provide those systems. FreightWaves receives data from those systems. And what the data is showing them is that approximately 25% of freight tenders offered to truckers or brokers from those TMS systems are being rejected. 25%. Now go back to Great Depression era in April, May, and you can see 0. Extraordinary. There was no one turning down freight. The only possible exception would be if you didn't have a truck in that area, but so many truckers have brokerage operations, nobody was turning down freight. Now we go from, again, in 20 so weeks, we went from 0, literally 0, fractions of 0, to 25%. Extraordinary demand, extraordinary change in the market dynamic. And again, you have to ask yourself, was your supply chain ready for this? Did you anticipate this? If you did, then that 25% isn't anything close to that for you. If you did, maybe you weren't paying more in freight in September than you were in March. Or maybe it was an exception. I have a customer, got a great customer that is extraordinary, and their tender rejections are less than 5% against the backdrop of the marketplace, 25%. What's the difference? I'm going to get to that in just a moment. So beneath the demand, obviously, prices have increased. Now, I remember I talked a minute ago, I talked about a 45-degree angle. It might have been a 45, might have been a little less than a 45-degree angle. But I also talked about the psyche. I talked about the psychology that goes on. Look at the slightly more, and I don't have a device to measure the amplification, but take a look here that prices rise faster than demand. And again, that happens every single time. And it's no exception here. So this is van is in the red, reefer is in yellow, and just remember reefer, because reefer is going to play a factor in a lot of our lives, quite literally our lives, but a lot of our careers in the very near future, because these vaccines are coming. And no, there is no stinking way on God's green earth, unfortunately, that we're going to have vaccines distributed in November. It ain't happening. And oh, by the way, I had to laugh and cry during the debate. There is no plan to have the military distribute vaccines. That's not a thing. That is not even remotely possible. The exception, rare exception of some packages may go on military flights to other military, but commercial transportation providers are arranging this in very close coordination with the vaccine producers. I know firsthand. I can tell you firsthand. I can also tell you that some of the vaccines are going to have to ship cold. And I'm not saying temperature controlled like we see on the highway. I'm talking freezing, stinking cold. -70 in some regard. Now, ice cream, as some of us know in temp control, ice cream ships frozen. Frozen truckloads are challenging. Frozen LTL is exceptionally challenging. When you look at a pie chart of the temperature controlled capacity in the United States, if you want to subdivide that pie chart into those who can do ambient 2 to 8 degree, and those who can do -20 or better, and hold, that's the also important thing, hold -20, you're looking at a sliver of that pie chart. So there, right there, and the president of IATA, the International Air Transporters Association, the airlines association, the president of IATA recently, is 2 weeks ago, estimated about 8,000 747s. Cargo holds of 8,000 747s are going to be required to move this vaccine. So I read where UPS is building storage, deep freezer, because no one, very few people are capable of handling this -70, -80 level of that some of this vaccine is going to have to travel in. The UPS is actually creating coolers that can get to that temperature. Now, the hope is that once and the anticipation is that once that initial surge of vaccines go out at that -70 target, that as time research will be able to get to that a more reasonable temperature. But this is something we're going to have to watch very carefully. So when we hear the director of the CDC talk about, realistically, to get enough of this vaccine into the hands of our population, it's unfortunately, as he said a week or so ago and was slapped down, it's looking second, third quarter of next year. And then you just heard Moderna mention today that they're looking at spring of 2020 or early 2021. So folks, buckle up. It's going to be a challenging ride. But what I want to caution you, and I don't want to raise any flags, because who the heck knows what's going to happen. This year has been a catastrophe of epic proportions on everywhere you look. So to think that we could have gone from Great Recession to insanity in demand, you had a 50-50 shot at that. You also had a 50-50 shot at being in a worse situation than the Great Depression, economically, our industry, and look, we are by no means out of the woods. I think if you're paying attention, American Airlines is anticipating laying off thousands, and everyone in the travel, restaurant, and air industry is looking at the same kind of picture. So just a reminder that we went from the best economy that we've had over the last 10 years. We've had an outstanding, the longest economic recovery in American history, to where we are now, and it's darn near close to 10% unemployed. And then there's a whole slew of people, as I just mentioned, thousands and thousands of people who are about to lose their jobs. If you're out of work, or if you're anticipating being out of work, you're not buying stuff. That stuff that you're not buying feeds directly into our industry, right? It's the stuff we're not moving. So demand is high. That's because there's truckers not running their engines. They're doing something else, have hung it up, and trucking schools, incidentally, have been slow and out of business for the first several months of this year with COVID. So really impossible to predict the future. That's obvious. Impossible to predict also where this rush in demand that we're experiencing ends. So if we're experiencing anything close to what we have now, or let's say we're in an equilibrium, some form of equilibrium, little high, little low in terms of demand, anywhere close to that, when these vaccines come online next year, the capacity of temp control is going to be sucked into that. And I think all of us want it. But if you're a temperature control shipper, and I was just talking to actually an area chemicals company yesterday, and planning a very similar talk, a panel discussion on this with the folks who are moving the vaccine or plan to move the vaccine. And I said, well, it's not gonna, you're in chemicals, and she mentioned, hey, no, we are in chemicals, we're in specialty chemicals, but we do move temperature control you know, to protect from freeze and in other cases. And so she's extremely interested in how that's going to affect her in 2021. And we can expect, clearly we'll expect a surge at some point, whether that's in the spring or early summer, late winter. We don't know. No one knows the timing of when the first serious batches are going to be sent out that's going to cause a drain on capacity. But 8,747s is quite a lot of volume. And you can realize, or you have to think about it this way. There is not a lot of capacity available in this country for frozen LTL, less than truckload. So a lot of these shipments are going to be a pallet or two in an entire truck. So, you know, that 8,747s, that's not too many truckloads per plane. Well, it's not going to go out in full truckloads all the time. So we've got to be thinking about that. It's going to suck a whole bunch of capacity dry. And I think it's, you know, for me, it's, we're going to be involved. Our company's going to be involved in this. I already know that. But even if we weren't, it's got to be the most fascinating logistics supply chain study, you know, there will ever be. And hopefully, God forbid, there's another one. But anything close to the logistical feat that's about to occur. So, moment of levity after that downer of a last 5 minutes. Good Lord. The 5 stages of grief turned into 5 stages of grief in the freight market. Right. The first, so when we're experiencing, you know, everything we experienced in 2019. Maybe a lot of us fell asleep in 2019 because things got a lot easier to move than 2017 and 18. Right. So then all of a sudden, when things went flatter and the Great Depression era, you know, things were really easy. And your focus was keeping your family safe and getting freight moving if you had freight moving. And then all of a sudden, those 20+ weeks of looking over your shoulder and thinking you're being punked, right? What in the heck is going on? So it's, you know, initial sense is, nah, this is, look, you picked it up, you committed, pick the thing up, let's go. I don't want to hear about it. And then, you know, when you start to see those prices increase, you're like, no, you're out of your mind. That's the anger. And you start to say, okay, I'm not dealing with you. I'm not dealing with you. You stink. And then, of course, then there's like, okay, well, wait a second. The entire marketplace is moving this way. And no matter where I turn, I hear this is happening. And that's the bargaining motion. It's like our moment. It's like, okay, listen, I didn't mean what I said. Let's get together. Let's talk about what works. And then, of course, there's depression when you realize, oh my God, this is killing me. My budget's flown. How am I going to come back from that? And then there's the whole acceptance. And I think depending on where we are, I think we're somewhere in between bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And acceptance is, look, you know, I've got to be better prepared next time. And my whole goal here, you know, I gave you some data, I gave you some things to think about in terms of how all the different things that happen. I hope I've given some concrete data around how the market is changing far more rapidly than it ever has. It's clear. I hope I gave you some reasons to understand that. But I want to just show you a little bit of data. While we're Tucker Company, we also own a company named QualifiedCarriers.com, and that's a shipper resource for evaluating carriers for safety and keeping your documents, your contracts, and everything that you need to work with a motor carrier in one place. So as part of that, we get data 2 times a month, and a little bit another piece of data a little less frequently than that. But we've got data on every single motor carrier that's alive in this country, and we get that refreshed on a daily basis. So we've kind of synthesized that and encapsulated it into things, data sets that we can make heads or tails of and tell stories with. So this is a story that something I want to share, and I've spoken to the Traffic Club before, and I've talked about this for this issue for the truck driver quote unquote shortage for most of the last 10 years, because that's how long we've been looking at this data. There isn't a driver shortage. And you can say, okay, you said a lot of stupid things so far in this 30 minutes, but that's got to be the stupidest thing you said. And I understand where that, that comment's coming from. You're way too angry, by the way, if that's what you're saying. But seriously, what is happening is in the marketplace is if you're a large carrier, if you're a medium large carrier, if you're a medium carrier, you have a driver shortage. There's absolutely no question about it. You've got a driver shortage. What this chart says over here on the right-hand side, all the way to the right, is the number of drivers in fleet sizes of 2,500 trucks, 2,501 and more trucks. All the way on the left is drivers who drive for fleet sizes 1 to 100 trucks. And you can see all of these, maybe not can't see it, but I'll tell you, mathematically, there are more drivers that drive in the 1 to 100 trucks than there are in all fleet sizes combined. And I'll tell you that number of drivers that has increased in that 1 to 100, and I don't have it in quite the way I'd like to show it to you, where I can show you the growth, but I'll show you here. And this is a very busy slide, and I think my cursor will work here. But in the fleet sizes of 1 to 19, we have 807,000 drivers. So a little bit more than half of the drivers in that 1 to 100 work for this size fleet. So I know that you were probably theorizing in your head, okay, 1 to 100, maybe that's a lot of 50 and 80 and 30 truck companies. Well, yeah, they're in there, but a little bit more than half, 60% or so, are in this size fleet, really micro small fleets. And the increase in driver count over just the last 8 years has been almost 100% increase. So think about your watch. If you're wearing an Apple Watch, you're wearing an Android watch or a Fitbit. I mean, I don't know, in terms of smartwatches, there might be 10. Think of the cell phone providers that you can buy from service providers. There might be like 7 or 8 or 9. Name it. There are not a lot of choices that we have, but in trucking, I'll just go back again. Trucking is going in completely the opposite direction of the consolidation. I know we read about consolidation, or this big carrier went out of business, but during the last 8 years, I don't want to say that the largest carriers haven't grown. They actually have grown. But when we hear about the driver shortage, we have to recognize that it depends on who you are, because the nation just topped 3 million drivers for the first time in our nation's history. And that's an extraordinary event, and extraordinarily high number of drivers have come, net new number of drivers have come into the marketplace in the last 8 years. So what I needed to share that with you, because if you're a shipper or a broker and you say, hey, I want to go asset based and things slow down, this is what I was talking about. Every time things slow down, a big shipper will say, I'm going to reshuffle the deck. I got to get rid of these guys, and I'm going to use fewer brokers. I got to really get the biggest, best carriers in. That is the absolute wrong thing. That I will predict a mess. I'll predict that comes apart at the seams like it has for most shippers. And that's exactly why you're at a 25% tender rejection rate as a nation among shippers. And the very best shippers and the truly next level shippers in terms of having data and running a tight ship are at 5%. But still, that's to them and anywhere close to where they want to be. So just a quick example of what it takes, I think, to build a durable supply chain. What does that mean? Well, does it mean that you're not going to pay higher prices when demand goes through the roof? No, it doesn't mean that. clearly there's no perfect supply chain, but you set yourself up for success or you set yourself up for failure. And failure looks like, that 25% or worse tender rejection. Success looks a lot like that 5%. And success also feels like, your organization has changed to understand what's happening and you're adapting. So these two companies that I'm referring to, both are very large companies. We know these companies. Every single person on this phone call knows these companies because that's kind of what they're into. One of those companies, when we get together for a quarterly business review, one of those companies brings their third-party warehousing outfit to the table, their transportation people to the table, their security people to the table, their planners, their transportation and distribution. I think that's 6 fingers. Then, and we all talk, and we talk about the issues, and we've got action items, follow-up items from the last QBR. And where did we learn that process? Well, we learned it because over tough experience where the third-party warehouse would say, well, hey, these guys don't show up on time. And we'd say, we can't show up on time when you call us at 3 o'clock for a 3 o'clock pickup. That's not, it's not doable. And there's finger pointing, right? I think everyone knows this, right? If you don't need a consultant to kind of tell you, but this company is a very large company, as I said, but they're incredibly nimble. They are just, because they take all of what, and part of the discussion is what's happening in the marketplace. And then their leadership in that meeting says, okay, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to you? What does it mean to you? What can we be doing together to meet this challenge? So, and I'll share a little bit some of what those ideas look like. And the second customer in the same space and the same products, similar products, no one would ever claim their products are the same as similar products. We meet with the transportation people, and then it's the transportation people responsibility to kind of bring that back into the organization. But the meeting breaks up and we all have our takeaways, and then everybody goes back to work. And you have to ask yourself, and I'm just sort of asking aloud and imagining that maybe not everyone hears the same message in the same way, and maybe not everyone takes to heart the changes that you have to make, and maybe not everyone makes those changes, and maybe the company doesn't adapt as quickly to the changing environment as customer number one. And that's critical. And some of these things, I won't get into all of them, but I will offer you folks a document that goes into greater detail on all these kind of points. But I was in the room, Maureen mentioned, I chair the Highway Committee for the National Industrial Transportation League. And I was a young professional just starting out 25 years ago, attending the National Industrial Transportation League Highway Committee. And there was a fellow named John Gentle, worked for Owens Corning. And John, they shipped the pink, insulation. Well, anyone that knows that kind of stuff, that's not attractive freight. Nobody's dying to handle insulation because it's messy and it's light and it's not very expensive. So he doesn't have a lot to spend in freight. Didn't have a lot to spend in freight. So what did he do? He wanted to become a shipper of choice. He created this document, which I will share with you after this. It gets into much greater detail into these areas. But that document was created in the 90s. And it was created with the Truckload Carrier Association and Knit League Shippers. And it was, it brought awareness to both sides as to what, as a trucker, these are the things that matter to me most. And these are the things that matter to my drivers the most. The shippers had obviously a different construct of what they needed. And they, over time, and I was fortunate to be in the room when shipper choice was coined, and fortunate to be in the room when this first document was created. And I may have raised my hand 2 or 3 times and said something I don't remember, but just happy to have witnessed this because it made a huge impact on me. And since it's made an impact on our company and how we treat our customers how we treat our carriers, and how we try to operate as professionals in the industry. But some of the things, um, some of the things a lot of shippers have taken to heart is, especially during COVID, are making restrooms available. And if they feel like, I can't let people into our restrooms, drivers are perfectly well appreciative of having porta potties that are maintained on a regular basis. They do not like sitting around waiting for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and not being able to, do basic human functions. It's a matter of just decency. But if you're not providing that in an environment like this, no driver wants to go there. So ship carriers are saying, you know what, I can't afford to lose drivers, so I'm not going to do business with this company anymore. That's the kind of decisions that are made during these kind of crises. But guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is the third time, as I said, in 6 years. When's the next time? Is it when COVID vaccines come out in like a few months? You have to be ready. You can't, what I've seen too often, and I saw this in 2019, is all the things that drove us to be attractive shippers, to care about the drivers, all those things begin to be less important. And I'm talking very frankly here, and I hope that it's not offending anyone. It's just that I don't want to sugarcoat this, and I want to explain it the very best I can. Running up on time for questions, so I'm going to close on, and I recognize, and you've already heard me say that I am a freight broker. I'm not a carrier, so this is self-serving, but it's also based in fact and data and experience, that you cannot be one of those companies that says, oh, I'm going to trim back on this kind of provider or that kind of provider. You've got to just be looking at performance. Today, I talked about Amazon 2-day being, so last century. Today, retailers are penalizing manufactured product makers if they're not delivering on time. And guess what? Retailers just turned the screws a little tighter in the last few months on the requirement to be on time. So on time matters. You have to also have the tools to measure on time, your carriers and your brokers. There's no exception to this rule. Every carrier and every broker today has to have GPS tracking. If they don't, you shouldn't be dealing with them. You should not be dealing with them. The time has come and gone where it's an excuse. We don't have it yet. It's here, and it's the only way you can fight those battles, and it's the only way you can make business decisions based on performance. You don't want to make them based on some arbitrary asset. Yes, you absolutely positively need assets. Assets, the only things that move freight, but you've got to make sure that the providers you're using, asset and non-asset based, collectively perform. If they don't, you're out of business. So this is what that document looks like, and we'll make that available. We already made it available to Maureen, and she will get that out to you, and it is a free resource. I encourage any member. We've invited the Knit League up here. We hosted the Knit League right before COVID at Tavistock Country Club. And some of the Traffic Club members came out to visit Jennifer Hedrick, executive director down there. Love to have more members from Traffic Club of Philadelphia as members of Knit League, but that's where you find out more information. And I'm happy to answer questions for our last 10 minutes or so.
Hey, Jeff, it's Maureen. Thank you so much. Very comprehensive, and thank you for providing the materials for us to share after the fact. We do have 2 questions in the queue. I'm not sure if you're able to see them, but I'll pull them up. They're both from Ryan Nemiroff. First one is back in the beginning of your talk. You were mentioning about the Monday rate versus not being able to honor it later. So I'm not sure. Can you see that there?
Yes.
Okay.
So how do you deal with a shipper when you provided the rate on Monday and you're not able to honor it? I think one of the things that I think separates us and has separated us for a long time is we understand what's happening in the marketplace. And part of what our customers most like, and I don't mean to make this commercial, but I think it's important that you know, that your culture, your company's culture, has to be one that is one that shares information, shares, you know, a lot of. I'm fortunate enough to be in a position that I attend. Prior to COVID, I was at a conference, you know, multiple conferences a month, or with you know, our key customers, you know, every month, and folks have customers have come to depend on me to share my experience, to share my information, share this data. The data that we have from qualifiedcarriers.com helps us understand. You know, the point I was trying to make at the end there is, if you're not, you know, if you're not accessing those 1 to 19 truck fleets, you know, you can't do that with the big carriers. So I think that the value that we bring is that we're sharing to every willing customer of ours who wants to listen. We're sharing our experience. So, you know, they're seeing it. But I'll tell you that in the months of July and August, we lost hundreds of thousands of dollars subsidizing our customers, holding rates, you know, much longer than we should have, because of the commitment that we have to our customers. It is not an easy thing to go back to a customer and say, you know, that rate I gave you on, you know, on Monday is no longer. I was trying to illustrate, you know, Ryan, and to everyone else, that that's the feel. And didn't necessarily mean that, you know, rates we were giving on a Monday were expired already. But we, as I said, we lost hundreds of thousands of dollars buying lower than what we were, you know, paying the carrier in July and August during the really worst of it.
There's also a second question there in the Q&A. Surprised that top shipper includes first come, first served. I would have thought honoring appointments would be more valued for those carriers doing what they say they will do.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you want, in an ideal situation, you know, Ryan, you're going back to where we were in May. You know, you could depend on time. There were not trucks on the road. There were not cars on the road. Trucks were moving a lot faster because they weren't in congestion everywhere. You didn't even have to speed to get faster. And it was easier to hit those appointments. Today, with demand as high as it is, it's not a question of, can I get the right truck at the right price at the right time? It's, can I get any truck? Can for goodness sakes, can you get me a truck? And those are the kind of, I'm trying to explain it in you know, and give you a little bit of emotion in that explanation, but that's kind of what you're feeling like. So when you're looking for any truck, and you know, when things are changing as rapidly as they are, and what's happening during that change is carriers sought anything in the depths of the recession, the truck recession. They sought anything to keep the engines running, so they were losing money. You know, I talked about us losing money in July and August when the market turned. Carriers were losing money in April and May, and June, and you know, so it's when they're losing money, they're looking for anything. When all of a sudden the market changes, they've got the opportunity to say, you know what, I don't want that business anymore. That was good to get me through the worst of it. I want to go over here. And that's really, and a lot of shippers went to market earlier this year or late last year and not anticipating. And again, a lot of shippers got rid of a lot of the providers who were working with them, either carrier or broker, because they wanted to kind of right size. And that, again, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, because it doesn't plan for what happens. So it's, you need, in the end, you need to be flexible. And a lot of those keys, you know, in the worst of times involve being flexible, providing advance notice. That's where that comes from.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We don't have any more questions in the queue. Is there anything else you wanted to convey while we were still on the phone?
No, I just, you know, I hope to, you know, I hope I'm wrong in my predictions around timeline of the of those vaccines. I hope that we get back to a semblance of normal much sooner. But kind of knowing and being in some of the planning and the execution of that, I just just want to keep folks as real and grounded in reality as possible, and just hope everybody stays safe and continues to practice what we need to practice, and that social distancing and mask wearing and washing our hands and all the things that we can possibly be doing. I hope everyone weathers the storm economically as well.
We wish the same for you, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to Tucker for helping us to get this set up. We'll have the materials that Jeff is sharing made available to the membership online, and a recording of this will be shared as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.